Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second live event we're doing for parents. I'm told we're live and that you can all hear me. I very much hope that's the case. So this is going to be a huge letdown, but really good to see you, even though I can't. And I really hope you're all well. I hope all your families are well in every respect. And as ever, you're always in our thoughts and our prayers. And when we meet on a Tuesday morning as a group of staff, we always think about you, and we always mention you in our prayers. We are doing this event for the second time. The feedback from the last event was very positive. It seems to be able to convey the messages we want and give you a chance to have your questions answered. So we're going to carry on with this format, and I'll follow up with any letters that I need to confirm any formal arrangements. And this video gets posted on the website as well, which it was downloaded quite a few times the last time we did it. So clearly it's a good way of getting information out to you. A key part of doing these kind of events is for you to ask questions. And in the background, though you can't see them, you've got Ray Reeves, our IT manager, and Chris Hall, one of our VPs. They're making the whole event work, and then Mr. Hall is going through all of the questions that come in and either answering them as they do pop in or publishing them for everyone to see. And at the end, he will kind of summarise what the gist of most of those questions are and give me an opportunity to talk through them. Try and keep really specific questions about your children to their form tutors or their heads of year, and if the questions that are asked are probably for the benefit of everyone, that's probably going to make the whole thing a bit more useful. Once again, there's sort of three main themes I want to talk through with you this afternoon. So the first one is the allocation of grades in 2020, that's for A-level and GCSE, remote learning and how that's going, and then about a return to school in some shape or form, and all of the protective measures we've put in place to allow that to happen safely. I've got no particular script to talk through, so I'll just sort of chat away for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then hopefully I'll stop and give you a chance to ask your questions, and I'll be able to respond to as much as I can, and we'll call it a day at no more than an hour, so you can get on and do what you need to do. So let's get straight into the content then. So feel free to pop in your questions while I'm talking, and they'll either get responded to or we'll pick them all up at the end. But the first thing I wanted to talk through with you was results and grades for 2020. And I don't want to repeat anything I said last time, but just a very brief recap that obviously students can't do exams this year, and so the grades will be allocated and awarded by the exam boards. All of the conduct of the exams and how that's going to be done this year is overseen by a body called Ofqual, and they're the exams regulator, and they will lay down the terms, conditions and methods for how the exam boards will actually award grades. What we have done as a school is we have produced centre assessed grades for every student in every subject, A-level, GCSE and vocational courses, and we're in the process now of submitting those to the exam boards. What we don't know fully is the exact method that the exam boards will use to arrive at the grades that will be awarded. Since I spoke to you last time and talked you through how that process works in principle, we have had a few updates because there was a consultation with Ofqual, which is now closed, and they've given us a bit more information. And what it looks like generally is that, for a start, I'll give you some examples. So we've put in our grades and we've worked those out, and we've tried to be as realistic as we possibly can. And obviously our instincts as educators is to see pupils get the best possible grades. But we haven't, overestimated what we think they could have got. We think we've been very fair in the grades we've awarded, but nevertheless, they've probably come out a little bit higher than we imagined the pupils would have got if they'd have sat the real exams. We know from the group of schools that we're in United Learning, again, the results are on the high side and we're probably a bit unrealistic compared to what pupils would have achieved. And we expect nationally that will be the case. The results that the schools will send in will probably be a bit too high than what would have happened had the exams been sat. And that's going to present Ofqual with a real problem, because it's unlikely they'll be able to give the pupils the grades that the schools have actually submitted, because that will mean the results are going to be too high nationally and will show a big jump from one year to another, and that's never happened, and they managed that process to make sure it doesn't happen. But also it would mean that the schools that have been over generous, it won't be fair on the schools that have been realistic. So what we know from Ofqual now is that they will take account of the central assessed grades that we send in, but they are likely to put more weighting on statistical factors, such as the results that the school achieved previously. So at Bacon's, the results that we achieved in the last couple of years. That's not a bad thing, particularly because we've done pretty well the last couple of years. They'll also look at the prior attainment of the pupils in each school. And again, that's a good thing for Bacon's because pupils come to us with high levels of achievement from primary schools. And then they'll also look at the grades that would be expected to be achieved across the whole country in all subjects. And as I said last time, by and large, that hardly ever changes from year to year. You know, the results in a particular subject in a particular year very rarely change by more than a fraction of a percent. So Ofqual know what the results should be across the nation, and they'll take all of those statistical factors and the results that we send in, and they'll come up with the grades that will be allocated. The grades will be allocated and they'll be released on the normal exam days in August. That won't change. And I think it's fair to say that across the whole country, the results will be pretty fair. They won't change much from last year. They'll probably go up a bit. And I think on average, the grades across the nation will be about right. The trouble is that that's all based on averaging. And if anything's based on averaging, it means there's always going to be some people above the average and some below to arrive at the average. So I think it's realistic to assume that when most pupils look at their grades in August, and I very much hope this is the case, I hope they'll look at them and think, on balance, they're pretty good. You know, on average, they're pretty realistic in terms of what the pupils would achieve. But it's probably highly likely that some pupils and some subjects might look at them and be disappointed. I think it's only fair to manage expectations in that regard, that there are going to be some cases where pupils think they haven't got the grades that they thought they were going to get, either in individual subjects or more generally across the board. Obviously, that's going to be quite harsh for those pupils, and some pupils will be the opposite. Some pupils will look at the grades and think they've probably done better than they might have realistically got if they'd sat the exams. But there's little or nothing we can do to change that at the moment, but it's only fair to kind of manage those expectations. And I really hope that it won't be much on the negative side, and that people will think that the process has worked out pretty well for them. What we also know is that the appeal mechanism that was first mentioned by Ofqual, that won't be a way of pupils appealing their results. So if they see their grades, they won't be able to send in an appeal to the exam board to say, look, I don't think I should have got this, can you reconsider? That won't work. Part of the reason why that won't work is that if one pupil appeals their grades and they go up, by definition, it will push another pupil's grades downwards. And that means that those pupils will have to have the opportunity to appeal as well. So it will very quickly spiral out of control. And that just wouldn't work, and it would unfairly advantage those pupils that put in appeals and made a strong case, and that can't happen. So there can be an appeal if we think there's been an administrative error, but it's the school that actually puts in that appeal if we think that our results haven't been processed correctly. It won't necessarily, definitely won't be an appeal about the actual grades of each student that are awarded. There's also the opportunity to resit exams, and this has always been mentioned as a possibility. So if pupils feel they haven't got the grades they've wanted to get, they can resit the exams in the autumn, or they can wait until the summer of 2021. If pupils resit the exams in the autumn, you know, that may sound reasonable because it gives pupils a chance to pick up a grades or some grades where they want to. But realistically, I don't know how much help that's going to be for pupils that have already embarked on courses in universities or courses in sixth forms. If pupils do the resits, we're told that the results for A-level will be out before Christmas, and the results for GCSEs will be out by the February of next year. So once again, there's quite a delay there, and although those results will stay with you for life, and it may be a good idea to resit them if you think that you should have done better, how much use that'll be for the first stages of progression, I'm not entirely sure. certainly for students that are joining our sixth form in year 12, we'll take a sympathetic view. If our students come to us and say they didn't get the grade they thought they should have done, we know what those pupils should have achieved, and if we think they've ended up on the unfair side of the Ofqual system, we'll certainly take that into account, and we'll be flexible on how we use our admissions criteria, because we know the work of the students and we know what they do and what they're capable of. I'd have hoped that universities as well will take a sympathetic view on students joining them for year 13 if their results are disappointing, and we'd be very, very happy to make a case to those colleges and those universities to say that we have a lot of certainty in what the pupils should have got, and we'd make a supportive case for them to help get onto those courses. So there has been some change in terms of grades. We do know a little bit more. We don't know the exact formula that Ofqual will use yet. When we do, and if it's able to be interrogated clearly, I'll certainly communicate that with you. But the process is largely as it was set out by Ofqual in the beginning when these things were first mentioned. So moving on to the next thing, and that's remote learning. I'll talk about school opening in a minute, but one of the outcomes of what we know about school opening is that for the vast majority of pupils, there won't be any contact with teachers in school this side of summer. And so that means that the vast majority of pupils will continue to learn remotely for the foreseeable future. And potentially that could occur into September as well. We don't know that. I'll probably mention a bit more about that in a minute. But certainly remote learning is what we're doing for virtually everyone at the moment. So thank you to all of the support that you're giving your children at home, because obviously it's something that has to be managed. It's very different, and it takes some organisation. So thanks for your support. I'm pretty confident that what the staff are doing is really good quality. The feedback I've been getting from a large number of parents and pupils is that they are finding the work suitable, engaging, challenging, useful, and I've got a lot of admiration for the staff that are trying to do this from home whilst managing their own childcare at sometimes as well, which isn't easy. And I really am confident they're doing a good job. And on speaking to colleagues in other schools, I think that what the Bacon staff are doing is better in many cases than what a lot of other schools are offering. We've decided to keep the timetable as it is. We did debate the notion of moving to a sort of more simplified, compacted timetable, but for the limited number of weeks left of this year, we felt it was better to keep things as they were. So that meant the students knew exactly what lessons they would have at any one time. We are now introducing live lessons. So the feedback from you last time was that the pupils that have had live lessons greatly enjoyed them, found them engaging. So we're rolling those out across the whole school from year 7 upwards, and the expectation is that pupils will receive half of their lessons will have a live component. So if a student has 4 lessons a week of a subject, 2 of those lessons each week will have a live component to them of about 20 to 30 minutes. So it doesn't mean that the whole lesson will be live, but there'll be a live element to around half of the lessons each week. If a pupil has 1 lesson a week in a certain subject, then I'd expect 1 lesson a fortnight to have a live element, just to manage the pupil's workload and the staff's workload, so that I don't want pupils to be staring at Teams all day long. They need to be doing some of their own independent work as well, which is the reason why we've gone for half the lessons will have a live element to them. We're still faced with a situation where unfortunately a large number of pupils are not engaging, so that's obviously a big challenge for us. It does vary between year groups, but it can be anywhere between about a quarter to a half of pupils are showing little or no engagement since we started this process, and that's a real big cause for concern. And I don't want to labour the point that I made last time, but if pupils are not engaging now, they are hugely disadvantaging themselves. If and when we get back to school in September, some students won't have had any learning experience of any real quality, for potentially 6 months, and to go from that to picking up your subjects and cracking on as normal is a real big challenge. So if pupils aren't engaging, and if parents, if you're struggling to get your pupils engaged, I just urge you do whatever you can to get them working, to pull them in, to organise them, to check what they're doing. If you need any help at all, contact Form Tutors and they'll be able to do that. But if pupils aren't engaging now, you're really setting yourself back months, if not years, in your educational journey. And for pupils that don't feel that exams are imminent, the pressure is just as great for you. If you're in the younger years of the school and you're not learning now, you're going backwards. That is the honest answer. If you're young and you're not learning now, you're actually going to be going backwards, and you can't afford that. You can't afford to do that. Okay, so whatever you can do, get working, get learning, and help yourselves. To help things along, all work is now in Show My Homework. So even though work may be on Educake or Hegarty or Teams, all the work that students are required to do is in Show My Homework, so it's simplified, and if parents go on there, they will see what's required for the week. And I've asked staff to make sure they post the work at the time it should be done, rather than block posting it for the whole week, because I know that some students and families found that quite overwhelming. So Show My Homework is the single point of contact. Any issues accessing that, get in touch with your form tutors as soon as you can. And do take advantage of all the work that we're setting there. We're also introducing tutor times, so twice a week there is a form tutor period, and there's an assembly once a week as well. We tried to do that at 8:40 in the morning, and with my optimistic head on, I thought all the students would be up, dressed and ready for their tutor times. That didn't work, and they weren't particularly ready. So I've decided to follow the masses, and now tutor times and assemblies are at 10:40, and they're at different days in the week to allow different staff that are teaching live lessons to manage that as well. So if you contact tutors and heads of year, they'll tell you when those tutor times and assemblies are, and do take part in those. The feedback from the students is they said it's been really good to see their form group face to face as close as you can get, and speak to each other and their form tutors as well. So that's all going on. We've got another tutor day coming up as well. That's going to be on the 15th of June. So there'll be no teaching on that day, and parents can expect to receive a phone call from tutors to check how things are, check how engagement is, to follow up on any welfare concerns we might have and any learning and engagement concerns we might have. And they'll be there to talk to you on that day. So expect a phone call on the 15th of June. It could be any time during the day. If we can't get hold of you, we'll leave a message and get hold of you later. And that will be for everyone, apart from the year 13s that have effectively left. So the year 13s that are going on to higher educational work, that contact won't happen on that day. It will happen for the year 11s that are on our transition programme into the sixth form. You'll be contacted, but it won't happen for the year 11s that have confirmed they won't be returning to Bacon's and are going off and doing other things post 16. So it's for virtually everyone, apart from those two groups of pupils that I mentioned there. So that's it about grades, and that's it about remote learning. And the next and very important thing I want to talk to you about is a return to school and how that might look like and when that might be. So I'm going to mix this with a bit of a presentation in a minute, and also talk you through some of the safety measures that have been put in school to make things safe for everyone who's returning. But let's just recap on the chronology a little bit. So we were always expecting pupils to return in some shape or form to school in just after half term. Then we had the announcement from the Prime Minister that primary schools would return for reception year 1 and year 6 and early years, and we were told at the time that secondary schools would not be returning, and we were disappointed by that. We want pupils to be in school. We're educators, we're teachers. Our belief is that the best place for children to be is in school, and no matter how good what we're doing online is and remotely, it's not a substitute for being in classes and seeing teachers face to face. We then found out within a couple of days that there was some capacity for year 10 and 12 to make a limited return to school. And we expected that to be this week, actually, and we were making plans for that to occur. And then at the start of the half-term break, we were told that the prospect of that is now more limited. And we have been told that year 10 and 12 can have some face-to-face contact with school staff from the 15th of June. So that's not this week, 2 weeks time, from the 15th of June, but we can only have a quarter of those year groups in school at any one time. So that's the latest information we've got. Year 10 and 12 can have some face-to-face contact from the 15th of June, but only a quarter of the students in at any one time. And now we've worked up plans around that, and I'll talk you through those in a minute as well. And really we want to maximise the chance of having pupils in school. So although what we're doing online is good, we want pupils to be in school, because that's I'm very confident that's where they should be. We've also got our key worker and vulnerable provision in school, and that's been going on ever since we closed, and that's going on now and growing. So we expect to have up to around 30 pupils in school anytime soon, and there will be children of key workers that need to get to work, and vulnerable is a very wide category, but students that we really feel should be in school under our supervision, and they're working in school as well. And we're not necessarily teaching them per se, they're doing their remote learning in school in a calm environment under our supervision. So I'm going to make an attempt at switching to a slideshow. So I'm just going to see if Ray's going to help me with this. So I've now shared my screen. Ray's going to make it live for you in just a couple of seconds. I'm just going to talk you through where we are in terms of opening, where we are in terms of safety, and what the plans are for pupils to return. So just bear with us for a second. I can see Ray in my screen. So if you put your thumbs up, I know that what the parents are seeing is the right thing, which should be the first slide. So I'll talk through fairly quickly with this, but this is taken from one of the government documents, and this shows the stages in coming out of the COVID-19 crisis and returning to a degree of normality. And the Prime Minister, and every time we see the daily updates with the medical officers, they always say that this is all provisional on the number of cases continue to fall, the R number staying below 1, and all of us, every single one of us, respecting social distancing measures, because if we don't and the number of cases creeps up, then all of the hope and optimism that things will one day get back to normal could be very quickly reversed, and we'll have to go back to tight lockdown again. So this is pretty much where we are now, between steps 1 and 2, where we've seen more relaxing of the measures, but a very, very limited extent. So exercise is allowed unlimited per day, to travel to exercise, to meet someone from another household outdoors, to have I think it's people from six people in your gardens, as long as you respect 2-meter distancing, and so on. And we're also at the stage now where there has been a limited return to school for primaries. That's early years reception, year 1 and 6. And I really do pay tribute to my colleagues in the primary sector, because they had to get ready for this at pretty short notice. They've done great work in reassuring parents that it's safe and that students should be in school. And my children went back to school this week as well, and I'll mention that again in a minute. So well done to those colleagues that have got that working. And as we move through step 2, we'll start to see more retail open, and that will happen from the 15th, as we've been told. Outdoor markets are now open, and some non-essential retail will open later on. And we hope to see leisure, pubs, restaurants, cafes, and so on start to open at some point in July. So that's a very, very brief picture of where we are, and secondary schools form part of step 2. I'm not going to talk through that because that's just taken from the guidance, and that is that year 10 and 12 students can have some face-to-face support in school, because they'll be the ones that will be taking exams next year, and therefore are priority groups. So in terms of increased opening, and I say increased because we are open and always have been, that's a key point there. So I understand there's going to be some anxiety about a wider return to school, but I think we should always bear in mind that staff and students are in school every day, and if it wasn't safe, they wouldn't be here. So we are open, always have been, and all we're doing now is a very, very gradual increase to what we're offering. At one point we expected 100 pupils in school in the key worker and vulnerable category. We haven't had that, nowhere near that. But that's been the picture across the whole country. But we were totally geared up to have that number of pupils in school and would have managed it very safely. And I think there's a real positive case now for children to be in school. Like I say, my children went back. I've got one in reception and one in year one, and they were delighted to go back. I can't think why, but I've just seen a difference in them in just a couple of days, and it absolutely has galvanised my position that children should be in school, and it's brightened the lives of the children that have gone back, and it's the right place for them to be. The thought of children being out of school for 6 months, is not good, and I know that will be the case for some, and they'll make the best of it. But if I could do anything to get more students back, then I absolutely would. I think that's where they should be. I'm not going to make any kind of political remarks at all, but I think the quality of the debate around children returning to school has generally been quite poor. I don't think we've really seen the positive case receiving the same degree of attention as some of the concerns and anxieties, and I don't think parents have really been given a particularly balanced view of what a likely return to school could be, and the extremely low risks that are inevitably going to be there. I think it's been overweighted with negativity, and that does disappoint me, but nevertheless that's totally outside of my control. And we are talking about a very gradual return, very, very limited numbers. This isn't a wholesale return at all. And something that's important to bear in mind is that we're going to have to live with COVID-19 for many, many months, if not many, many years. And we live with lots of risks in life. We live with lots of diseases and illnesses, and COVID-19 will be no different. And if we can get to a point where we can get about our daily lives and children can learn and we can go to work and manage the risks, that's the place we ultimately need to be, because it's not going to go away. That's the reality. Even if there's a vaccine, it might not go away. If there's a vaccine for flu, but it still kills thousands of people every year. And it's, like I say, it's something we're going to have to learn to live with. I'll talk about vulnerable groups in a minute, but clearly what we know from this virus is that there are people that are far more vulnerable than others, and the steps that are going in place at the moment, protecting the vulnerable, protecting the elderly, protecting those that have medical conditions and are shielded, is absolutely the right way to go, and that will go a long way in allowing younger, healthy people to get on with life and get on with work and school, whilst protecting those that are more at risk from the virus. And in terms of levels of risk of people returning to school, and it applies to people going to work as well, these are the kind of things that have been coming out from parents and staff and children I've been talking to. So firstly, there's the risk to young people, and one of the few positive things about this illness is that the effects on young people are very, very small. The risks to young people, and by young, I'm not just talking about children, I'm talking about working age adults as well. The risk to young, healthy people is very, very low indeed. The numbers of school-age children that have sadly died is tiny. I think it was 2 the last time I looked at the ONS report, which is a great tragedy for those families. It's horrific, but nevertheless, it's a very, very, very small number of people. And I'm sorry to speak in these terms if you or your family have been affected by this disease, but I do need to to speak about it in a rather factual way as well. And it's obvious that the risks as people get older and as people get above 70 is much, much greater, and we've seen those graphs of the age group versus the number of deaths and cases, and it massively increases as people get into the 70s and 80s. Part of the reason why it's difficult to sort of quantify the risk for a lot of people for the virus is because the risks are so different for different people, and I think someone who's 80 or above is 70 times more likely to die than someone who's less than 40, and that's a huge difference, and we need to treat the virus differently for different people, in my opinion. But what we do know is, and there's very, very strong scientific consensus, is for young people, particularly children, they are not largely at risk from this virus. There's also the concern of the risk to adults, so staff in school and adults at home. And once again, the risk to healthy working age adults is low. The chance of a child in school picking it up and taking it home and passing it on to an adult at home, and that adult becoming very seriously ill or being hospitalised or even dying is very, very, very low indeed. And I've got every confidence that children wouldn't be allowed to come back to school if that presented a very significant risk to people at home. That's different for people that are in vulnerable categories, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That is different, and there's measures there to protect against that. But where adults at home are healthy and are not elderly, the risk to those is very, very limited indeed. And there's also the widely held view, for very good reason, that there's the risk that the more people that go back to school, the risk that the virus will continue to spread in the community. And that is absolutely true. The more people that go back to school, the more people that go to work, the more people that go to use public transport and go to crowded places, there's a greater risk of spread. And the scientific advisors know this, and that's why the release of the restrictive measures is very, very gradual indeed, because we don't want to see the number of cases going up quickly, the R number going above 1, and then having to reimpose restrictive measures. So yes, there is a risk that it will spread the virus by people coming back, but it's a very limited risk, and it can be a controlled risk. I've mentioned the R number, and I'm just going to talk through this very, very briefly. So the only reason I do it is not to repeat what you've already been told every night on the news briefings, but there is some misunderstanding about the R number, and I just want to clarify a few things there. So the R number is the infection rate, and for this virus, it's the number of people that, if one person is infected, the number of people that person will infect. So if you see in this diagram on the left-hand side, if one person's infected with COVID-19 and there is no protective measures put in place, if the virus is allowed to, run out of control and do its own thing, each person will infect 3 people. Those 3 people will go on to infect 3 other people, and so on and so on and so on. And you can see that the number of cases very, very quickly grows exponentially. And that's what happened during the peak of the outbreak. The number of cases went up very rapidly, and there were thousands and thousands of new cases emerging. So that's the R number for COVID-19 at around 3. It could be up to 4, depending on who we listen to. For something like measles, it's much higher even than that. It can be 15 for measles, which is why you get those very rapid outbreaks, but they can equally disappear as rapidly as well. The graph on the right shows, this is taken off the BBC website, this shows how the number of, how the R number dropped very, very rapidly after lockdown measures began, and it's now below 1 and has stayed below 1. And that's one of the key objectives of all of the measures that are in place, is to keep the R number below 1 to stop the virus spreading. What that means is, and I've just heard a few people say that if the R number is going up, that means that the virus is out of control again, or it's not safe until the R number is 0, it's disappeared. That's not what it means. As long as R is below 1, it means that the virus cases are declining. So, for example, if the R number is 0.5, that means that 100 people will pass it on to 50, 50 will pass it on to 25, and so on and so on and so on, until eventually the virus, it eventually peters out. There's not enough hosts for the virus for it to carry on reproducing, and it will go. So even if the R number changes and goes up a little bit or down a little bit, the number of cases will always go down if the R number stays below 1. And if the R number is below 1, the cases go down exponentially, in the same way that if the R number is above 1, the cases will go up exponentially. So as long as it's below 1, the cases will continue to fall. And that's just repeated there. If the R number is lower, the decline of the virus is lower as well. There's a lot of regional difference, and we live in London, which has currently got an R number of, I think, this might be a little bit out of date now, but it's around 0.4. That's below the England average, which is less than 1, and there's no areas of the UK that have got an R number of greater than 1. And we've heard more on the news lately that there is a very real case of localized shutdowns and lockdowns, which could be on a very small scale if there's individual communities where there's an outbreak, or it could be regions where that may be the case as well. But London is quite fortunate because the number of cases has dropped massively. The R number is very low. We went into the peak and the outbreak much faster, as would probably be expected, and therefore we've come out of it before the rest of the UK as well. And hopefully and optimistically, the rest of the UK will catch up to London. And I think the average number of cases in London is around 25 a day now. There's days where it's higher, days where it's lower. Some days it's been 0, which is obviously a massive improvement on a time when there were over 1,000 new cases every day in London. So the chances in London of contracting the virus are now hugely lower than they were a month or so ago at the peak of the outbreak. So all of this leads me to, I'm not trying to persuade anyone at all. I'm just trying to reassure that I do think it is safe for the very limited of return to school of children that's been allowed. Like I say, I wouldn't send my children back to school if I didn't think it was safe, and I absolutely do, and they have gone back. More and more children are coming to school now, and will continue to, and I wouldn't do that if I didn't think it was safe. But I think the risks are extremely low of the limited numbers that are coming back. So from the 1st of June, so that's from this week, we continue to see children of key workers and vulnerable children in school. They're working in IT rooms. Sorry, don't know why the bullet points have gone that way. There's probably 2 groups working in school, and that's likely to grow. Whether it's going to go beyond 2 groups or not, we don't know. But there won't. We might have around 30 students at some point, but we don't think we're going to go above that. They're often working flexible hours to suit parents, and they're in for some days and not others, and maybe just for mornings or just for afternoons. We're very flexible and want to support parents to help them get to work where we can. And they wear their own clothes in school because it's better for them to be able to wash their clothes and come to school in clean clothes every day. And that's what's going on at the moment. Now, following the latest guidance from the DfE, we are allowed to have a gradual opening from the 15th of June. We have decided to prioritise initially those students in year 10 and 12 that are struggling to engage at home. Now, some parents might say, well, what about my child? They've been working hard, don't they deserve something? And yes, they absolutely do, and they will get something. But at the moment, where we've got such a limited scope to see pupils for a limited time, we really as a school need to crack some of the pupils that are not managing to engage and get them in school and get them working. Once I'm confident that the vast majority of pupils are engaging, then we can turn our attention to giving everyone some kind of provision. But from the 15th of June, initially, we are going to focus on the 10s and 12s that are struggling to engage. We will be writing to you. In fact, the letter's gone out today by first class post, so you'll get that anytime soon. We're inviting 48 year 10s and 23 year 12s. You'll be invited into school, and it's an expectation you will be here. And your day will be from 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon with a short break. And what we want you to do is to be working on your remote learning with support from us in the IT rooms as if you were at home, but we want to give you some structure, give you some routine, help you get set up on the platforms and make sure you're working. Once we know you're working, you can either stay with us or give it a couple of days. We might say you're fine working from home for now. But certainly for probably the first week, maybe 2, those pupils are going to be the priority for us. After that period of time, we'll open up the offer to as many other year 10s and 12s as we can. They'll work in the same room and they'll sit at the same places where possible, and that's one of the measures to control the spread, as I'll talk through in a minute. You'll wear your own clothes, and there's a dress code that's going to go out to you to say what's allowed and what's not. But we still want the expectation that we'll see all year 12s and 10s at some point before the end of the year. One of the difficulties we've got is a massive limitation that we can only see a quarter of year 10 and 12 on any one day, and we're not allowed to have a quarter in the morning and a quarter in the afternoon. So the amount of time we've got to see you is so limited that we really need to maximise it where possible, and this is the strategy that we're going to adopt. So if you get that letter, you'll also get a phone call from a member of SLT telling you what the drill is. That's an expectation you'll be here from the 15th at 10 o'clock sharp, and we look forward to seeing you. In terms of assessment, we wanted to have exams at the end of the year for all pupils in year 10 and 12 in all subjects. That's going to be virtually impossible because we can only have so few in at any one time. So we will be able to conduct year 12 exams in your subjects, and they'll go on from week commencing 22nd of June. The week after that, from the 29th of June, Year 10s will come in and they'll do exams in English and Maths on site, which will be marked by staff. All the other exams and for all other year groups will have to be conducted remotely at home, and we'll send those out, probably going to be in Microsoft Forms for you to do remotely, and we'll mark those and send the results back for those. So we can't do assessment to the extent we wanted to, just because of the massive restrictions on numbers that we've had. And if you can only have a quarter of students in on any one day, it would just take forever to do all the exams on site in all subjects. So that's the limit of what we can do. English and Maths on site for Year 10s, everything else remotely. Year 12s will be able to do their subjects in school and be marked by staff. So I mentioned vulnerable groups earlier. There's a group a group that's been identified as shielded, and if you are shielded, you'll know because you received a letter from the NHS. That applies to adults and children. And if children or adults are shielded, they should not come to school. Staff that are shielded won't be coming to school. If any pupils are shielded, they won't be coming to school because they're particularly vulnerable. There's also vulnerable categories, and that includes the elderly, diabetics, asthmatics, many other conditions that are very freely seen on the public health websites. I can send those out in a letter to you as well for you to see those groups, but that you would probably know about that already by now. We don't really want vulnerable children to be in school if they've got those kind of medical conditions. We can't guarantee that you'll be able to socially distance at all times, so we're not going to ask pupils in those categories to come in, certainly not initially until the guidance changes. And we'll be asking all pupils to fill in a form just to confirm they're not in those categories and they understand the protocols that we're putting in place. If any pupils are living with someone who's shielded, that's extremely clinically vulnerable. Once again, we don't want to see you in school in the nicest possible way. The advice is that you should only be in school if it's really necessary and if you can guarantee stringent social distancing, and we don't think that's right to put you through that, and therefore you're not going to be invited in the initial wave until things change. So if you're living with someone who's received a shielding letter, you shouldn't be coming to school. If you're living with someone who's in the vulnerable category, so if you've got an adult at home who's, for example, diabetic, pregnant, asthmatic, elderly, one of those categories, it's fine for you to be in school. The risks are extremely low of causing problems at home, and the guidance is that you should be in school. And the same applies to staff as well. If staff live with someone who's vulnerable, that they'd be expected to be in school. Check all this out on the Public Health England website. If you're not sure, speak to us or drop me an email and I'll get it clarified for you. In terms of public transport, the guidance is very, very clear that we should all be avoiding public transport where possible. Part of the reason why primary school pupils were prioritised over secondary for return is, one, about the educational stage they're at, and if primary school children miss out now, it can have a real damaging impact long term, but also secondary school pupils rely on public transport much more than primary, and they want to discourage that. And also secondary school pupils mix more outside of school, so they have larger networks of friends, and that would risk spreading the virus more than primary school pupils. And that's not where the government want to be at the moment. So that's why primary is being prioritised over secondary, not because secondary school pupils are any more risk. I think it's important to clarify. It's not to do with the risk to those pupils. It's more about containing the spread of the virus. So please, if you can avoid it, don't use public transport. Most pupils could walk here if they wanted to. There's plenty of cycle provision as well. So get up half hour earlier, put a pair of trainers on and walk to school. Don't use public transport, please. And the times of the start and the end of the day have been chosen to avoid the peak times as well, if you must use public transport. And social distancing must be practiced in school and on the way to and from school. And we'll take a very, very strict view on if pupils are deliberately flouting that. Likewise, if pupils are flouting that to and from school, we'll take a very dim view on that as well, because you are required to socially distance on your way to and from school. This is off the TfL website. I won't repeat it, but you can look at that. If you're using public transport, wear a face covering, keep 2 meters apart where you can, wash hands before and after the journey. Hand sanitizer is at stations over the network, and use contactless payment. That's straight off the TfL website. Look at that if you need to, but avoid public transport where possible, which, if you're honest with yourself, you can do. Right, so last thing, and sorry, I've talked for far too long, but I've got into this now and I've wanted you to see it all. The protective measures we've put in place are straight off the DfE guidance. None of it's difficult to follow. It follows these broad categories of measures which will keep people safe in school, keep people safe at home, and reduce the spread of the virus in the community. I'm going to go through each one in turn now. The most obvious one is avoiding mixing with someone who's unwell. And that's the key, at the top of the hierarchy of measures for us to consider. So if anyone displays any symptoms of COVID-19, that's a high temperature, new or continuous cough, or loss of sense of taste or smell, they will be sent home and they're required to self-isolate for 7 days. While they're awaiting collection, we have a special room for them to be supervised while they're awaiting collection. They should get tested, and if the test is returned negative, they will return to school. And the class they were in do not need to self-isolate. So if a student's in a class, goes home with symptoms, gets tested, and it's negative, that class, which the class is sometimes called bubbles to reflect the fact they're kept together, then they don't need to self-isolate. If the test comes back as positive, then that class or that bubble will get sent home and they're required to self-isolate for 14 days because the virus won't have incubated yet. So that's a 14-day isolation period. But the members of that pupil's household do not need to self-isolate. So if a pupil comes home to you, if your child comes home because someone in their class has tested positive, the pupil needs to your child rather, needs to self-isolate for 14 days. You do not, unless your child shows symptoms of coronavirus, and therefore you do need to self-isolate at that point, which is in line with the guidance. And then you're encouraged to get a test as well. Anyone who's displaying symptoms of coronavirus can receive a test. And that ties in with the new NHS test and trace procedures out there, which also has contact tracers. So we may get contacted to tell us that someone's been tested positive. We'll act on that if we find out about it. And there's also public health teams that will go into schools and advise them if an outbreak is suspected in the local area. Hand washing is absolutely vital. We've been told about this from the absolute day one of the outbreak. It's so important to wash hands regularly, 20 seconds with soap and water. If you can't do that, use sanitizer. Very, very quickly, this is why it's so important. This is a quick diagram of a virus. Viruses are surrounded by, I'm going to launch into science teacher mode very briefly. They're surrounded by a lipid membrane. A lipid means a fat or an oil. So viruses are coated with a fat, basically, a fatty coating, and that helps hold it together. And viruses don't hold together well. They're quite weakly put together. If you wash your hands with soap and water or a sanitizer, it does two things. It stops it sticking to surfaces, particularly your skin. Rather like if you try to wash up a greasy frying pan, if you wash it up with just water, it just tends to push the fat around. If you add a few drops of washing up liquid detergent to it, all the fat breaks up and it falls off the pan very easily. Exactly the same thing happens when a virus is on a surface like a tabletop or when a virus is on your skin. So if you ever think, oh, what can washing hands do to prevent a virus? It absolutely can. And also it breaks up the envelope. So that envelope that's around the virus particle, the soap or the sanitizer will break up that envelope and the virus will literally fall apart and it won't be effective anymore. It can't infect anyone. So really important that we hand wash regularly. Anyone who comes into school will hand wash or sanitize on entry and they'll do the same on exit. Anyone will have to sanitize before eating. There is sanitizer at the entrances, in classrooms, next to things like photocopiers. Anytime someone sneezes or coughs, they're required to sanitize their hands, and everyone is instructed to avoid touching their mouth, nose or eyes. So absolutely vital that everyone washes and sanitizes their hands regularly, and that will keep people safe. Good respiratory hygiene is one of the next methods. If we follow the catch it, bin it, kill it approach, it will reduce the spread. All pupils will be issued tissues on their arrival and they'll keep a tissue on their desk. The bins in the classrooms are all got lids on. If someone can't get to a tissue in time, they're to sneeze into their elbow. Everyone is to sanitize their hands after coughing or sneezing. All windows in classrooms are open or the air ventilation units are on, and we can teach outdoors as well. The risk of spread outdoors is much lower than it is indoors, and where possible, if the weather's nice, we can sit in the grounds and do our things outdoors. Cleaning, so all surfaces have been cleaned down and disinfected. We now have daytime cleaners in school that are constantly going around cleaning things like handles, handrails, and anything that someone could touch. All the keyboards and the IT equipment is cleaned down every evening. Doors are held open with props, so that means we don't have to push the doors and touch the handles. Regular bleach or detergent is absolutely fine at removing the virus, so it doesn't need to be any particularly harsh chemical. Detergents or bleach is fine. We don't have pupils sharing equipment in school, so what they use each day is what they'll keep, and pupils will need clean clothes every day, again as another method of reducing the spread. And that's why we're not having pupils in uniform. All this will be communicated to you in writing if you're due to come in, and there'll be a training session for all pupils when they come in, but this is just to talk you through and reassure you on the things that are happening in school right now. And the last thing is we minimise contact and mixing, so all of the pupils will remain in the same group, so we won't move pupils between groups to reduce the mixing. They'll be in the same rooms and the same places. They'll be 2 meters apart where at all possible, but if they pass each other in the corridors, that's a very low risk and that's acceptable. Our behaviour policy now reflects the fact that pupils are required to socially distance. There's a difference between inadvertently getting, within 2 meters of someone and continually deliberately doing it. We'll treat the latter, very strictly. There's one-way systems around school. If ever there's a need to queue, they'll be at 2 meter intervals. First aid is done in a different way to reduce contact with pupils. Entry and departure is managed, so pupils will be dismissed at staggered intervals, and there's an entry and an exit method. Pupils are not to hang around after school, they're to go straight home and respect social distancing on the way. And likewise, parents and visitors, please don't congregate at the entrances, and please don't come to visit to school unless you've got a prior appointment, because we don't want any more people in reception than we absolutely need. And finally, PPE is something that people raised last time, and it's in the guidance, and the guidance is very clear that PPE is not required or recommended beyond what people normally wear for work. There's a couple of exceptions to that, and one of those is first aid, which is easily dealt with. And face coverings and face masks are not recommended in school either, and we'll be discouraging the use of those in school. So, sorry, I didn't intend to talk for that. I said 20 minutes, which turned into an awful lot longer. But I wanted to talk you through all that, to reassure you, to let you know that everything's been taken very seriously. And if you're on the list to return to school, these are the kind of things you'll see. And for those of you who aren't returning to school imminently, these are very much expected to be the kind of things that we'll see in September as well, because it's unlikely there'll be a significant enough change that all of these measures can be dropped. Right, good. I'm going to stop talking now. Sorry about that. And I'm going to hand over to Chris, who will summarise any questions you've got, and then I'd be very happy to answer them where I can. Chris, what have you got for us?
Thank you, James, and thank you to the parents and carers who are submitting questions. So hopefully I've addressed as many of those as I can. If I've not published them, it's because I've tried to address individual issues or concerns directly to you rather than publish them publicly, but there are a few recurring questions that are coming up. I suppose the main one is, what are the consequences if students don't come in, if they're part of the targeted group of students that are expected to come in from the June 15th?
Yeah, good question. We've identified those pupils because they are the ones that aren't engaging at home, and we really do expect them to be in. And you should do everything you can to encourage them, unless they're in one of those vulnerable categories. Yeah, the answer really, I'm not going to, I have to show my hand. There's not a lot we can do right now. If they choose to stay at home and we can't get them in, we can't issue fines at the moment. So we can't enforce it from that respect. I'd just be extremely disappointed if a student didn't come into school when we've asked them to, because we've identified them as falling way behind. I would expect them to be in school to at least demonstrate they can work independently, and then we can say that's fine. You've been in school for a few days, now you can crack on at home. Now, my dim view may not sound particularly intimidating to some, but that's about as much as I can do at the moment. But when we get into September and we're looking at exam entries and courses, if pupils have shown a complete disregard to any kind of engagement now, and they want to be doing courses, in subjects in September, frankly, I'm not going to let you do them. I will severely restrict your offer and the exams that you're going to sit next year. So don't do it. If we're asking you to come into school, it's for a really good reason. It's for your benefit. You need to come in. And, I've made this point last time I spoke to you as well. You're going to be massively disadvantaged because there are people in this school that are working brilliantly. They're really cracking on. They're really learning hard. You're going to be doing the same exams next year. You're going to be competing for the same jobs, the same degrees, the same apprenticeships. And you're doing yourself a disservice. You are putting yourself at the bottom of the pile. And, frankly, I can't say much more than that. If you want to put yourself at a huge disadvantage compared to other people, well, that's up to you. But frankly, I don't know why you'd want to do that to yourself, because you'll regret it bitterly for many, many years to come. Okay. Sorry to be doom and gloom, but that's the reality. Chris.
Thank you. The next question is, there's two parts to it, kind of linked. The first one is there's quite a few parents who are concerned if they are from a BAME background, and what we're doing to ensure the risks to those students are minimised. And second of all, would we be sharing our risk assessments with parents to reassure them that we're putting everything in place to preserve the safety of their son or daughter?
Yeah, absolutely. Good questions. Thank you very much. So yes, the risk assessment there was a draft done ready for the expected return of year 10. We've had to go back and review that, year 10 and 12, sorry. We've had to go back and review that in light of change guidance. So the staff have got until tomorrow midday to give me comments on that. And of course, the union reps will see that as well. And then it's to send that to United Learning, who have the ultimate responsibility for the school. And their board will hopefully approve that early next week. Once I've got that, I'll then post that on the college website and you'll be able to see it. There's very little in there that I haven't spoken about in high level terms just now. But yes, you're very, very welcome to see the risk assessment. But you should do, because it breaks down all of the measures we've put in place, and hopefully it should give you reassurance that what we've done is safe. In terms of BAME, yeah, I anticipated the question. And it's very clear, and we saw that report that was released this week, that people from BAME communities are disproportionately affected by the virus. Although they're not formally in the vulnerable categories yet, the evidence is clear that they are disproportionately affected. What is also very unclear is the reasons for that, and there's mixed views and limited evidence of whether that's a biological, physiological reason behind it, or whether it's more to do with socio-economic factors, such as the quality of housing, the jobs that people fulfill. And that's not to say that people in those communities live in poorer quality housing. For everyone, it's obviously, this is a very, very broad generalisation. And we've had examples of things like bus drivers who are disproportionately from those ethnic groups, who are disproportionately affected by the virus, people that work in the NHS as cleaning and portering roles, for example, have been disproportionately affected and are from those groups. So I am aware and sensitive to those issues. I'm still, there's been nothing presented to me so far that would say that the measures we've put in place are not appropriate to make a return to school safe for people in those communities. I do think it is safe. I think if there was real strong evidence that it's unsafe for people in those groups to come back to work or come back to school, we would be told that. And there's lots of different groups of different medical conditions and of different ethnic groups that are affected in a different way. I know Bangladeshi people are twice as much at risk as the virus as others. Some are less than that. But nevertheless, I mean, ultimately, you'll have to think of that yourself and come to your own judgment. But I wouldn't be asking people in those groups to come into work or school if I didn't think it was safe. On a personal level, my children are in an ethnic minority group that's affected. And I didn't it didn't affect my judgment in sending them to school. I think they can go to school. So yeah, I understand there's a cause for concern. I'm very happy to talk through it with you, but I'd like to reassure you that I really do think it's safe, and I wouldn't like to think that people are using that as a reason to not come to school if they've been invited in. And the protective measures we put in place are quite robust, and don't forget we're at a time now where the statistics we've seen in terms of the number of people that have been affected, hospitalised and sadly died, you know, the rate of transmission now is massively lower than it was a month or so ago. The number of cases in London is hugely reduced to be very, very low indeed. So that all points to the fact that I think the risks generally are low for everyone, unless you're in those shielded categories, and that would apply to those vulnerable groups as well. So sorry, that was a long answer, but I'd like to reassure you that I think the risks are small.
Thank you. Next question is about exam entries and grades and the appeals process. And a few parents and or students are concerned about how they might be affected and downgraded by that process. Will we be sharing with parents the grades that we entered as a centre to help them with any appeals process that they might want to follow?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I understand there's going to be some concern, and in reality there will be some disappointment, whether someone's going to be disappointed with all their results or whether the odd subject they're going to be disappointed with. I think it would be naive to think that everyone's going to get exactly what they want. That's just the reality. But it doesn't make it any easier for those people that might be on the receiving end of it. I appreciate. At the moment, absolutely no, we're not allowed to share the results that we've sent into the exam boards. And in fact, the exam boards have been really robust and said that to do so would be actually be malpractice, and we'd be investigated as a centre, and our results could be blocked if we did that. So it is, you know, quite a high level offence to even share those results. Whether we're allowed to release those assessed grades after the final grades have been published, we don't know. They might just be embargoed forever, or we might be able to release them. That's not been said at the moment. And just to re-emphasise as well, students won't have the opportunity to appeal their individual grades. The centre can appeal if we think there's been an administrative error, but individual students can't appeal their grades, for the reason that it would just be massively unworkable if student A said, I think I should have got a 9, you know, because of all these things I've been doing, and here look at the work I've been doing, and here look at my books, because that would mean that a student would have to be pushed down the rankings, and it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. So the exam boards are going to say, if you think you've come off worse out of this, then you've got the opportunity to do the exams in the autumn. And I know that doesn't sound a great solution, but it is always going to be the exam boards get out of that situation. They'll say, well, anyone who thinks they didn't do well enough, they can just do it, and then they can prove how well they should have done. So yeah, that's the answer to that one. I'd love to reassure you that everything's going to be all right, but I don't want to manage your expectations falsely. I do think on balance most people will be fine, but it's a very imperfect system, and it was always going to be the case in this kind of scenario, unfortunately.
Thank you. An impossible question, but one that is coming up is, when would you expect full reopening of the college to take place?
Oh, when would I expect? Well, I hope it's soon. I really do. It's been really nice seeing more pupils in school this week. Even the 20 odd that we've had, it's made the college feel alive instead of this empty shell of a building. I think there'll be a far greater return in September, but I think it's unlikely that there'll be a full return in the first week in September, going from very, very little, which is where we're going to be even when year 10 and 12 start to come back, to everything in the first week in September. I think is highly unlikely. I don't know. I can probably see a scenario where for a few weeks there might be a rota system of some year groups in, some year groups out, or half or a third of the pupils in and then a half or two-thirds of the pupils out. I mean, that sounds quite horrific in terms of progressing with learning and you being able to go to work and so on. But, fingers crossed, as the infection rates go down and everything works out well, we can get back to normality very, very early in September. Everything crossed, that's where we want to be. But going back to that R number again, everything we do to get people out and about may push that R number up. So, more of you going back to work now may push it up. More of you using trains and buses pushes it up. Year 10s and 12s coming back on the 15th may push it up. If pubs and restaurants open, that's going to push it up a bit. And the scientists have to be convinced that it's not going to go up too high before they let the next phase of lockdown come out. So if all goes well and all people go back to school, it will be because we've all done our bit and we've helped with social distancing, we've washed our hands regularly, and we've made sure that we've had the right community attitude and done our bit to help things get back. And I'm talking to young people here as well. I've seen some pretty shocking behaviour from young people in terms of not respecting social distancing, showing quite a flagrant disregard for it. The more anyone does stuff like that, the longer we're going to be out of normality and the longer lockdown will continue. And, if you want to go and see your elderly relatives, if you want your parents to go back to work, if they're struggling financially, then do your bit and, stop the virus being spread, because every single human being in the community can help, and we all need to do it.
Thank you. And then the last big kind of thread of question is regarding obviously the events that are happening in America and a lot of the concerns that a lot of our students will have, as we're a very diverse community. Is there any plans from the college in this very difficult time to be able to address those issues either through assemblies or tutor periods or even through lessons?
Yeah, we have discussed that. We're very aware of it. We're very aware that we're a diverse community, and we represent so many different races and religions. And I mean, that video that we saw of George Floyd, I watched it a couple of times, but I can't watch it anymore. It's just appalling. Yeah, and anyone, whether you're black, white, Asian, or anything else, no one can not be horrified by what they saw, and no one can feel the pain for that family, and generally the pain that particularly Black Americans are feeling now, which has obviously come across and been translated into the way that people in minority and disadvantaged groups are feeling across the whole world, including the United Kingdom. Sorry, I'm talking too far. I'm not getting directly to the point, but I feel it's important to express my feelings. And I think what shocked me most about that was that that poor man, that when he had that knee in his neck, the last 2 minutes of that, he was unconscious. So any pathetic attempt to say maybe he was dangerous and maybe the police were protecting themselves and he could have got up and he could have caused harm. The poor guy was unconscious on the floor for 2 minutes, while he was still effectively being suffocated, and it's just horrific. And the people that are responsible for it, deserve everything they're going to get. In terms of how that's affected people here, I've also got to say I'm never going to condone violent protest at all, and for police officers in this country to be attacked for what happened in America is wrong, and I'm always going to condemn that. But I understand that lots of people in this country are going to be really feeling a lot of pain. So yes, we are planning to address that through the assembly time, through the tutor time. The pastoral team and our chaplain are aware of that. When you are back to school, we will clearly address it. But my encouragement for all of you is, no matter what you're feeling about this, and no matter how high your tensions are running, two wrongs is never going to make a right. And we can challenge injustice, and we can challenge discrimination, and we can challenge it peacefully. And I think that's always going to be by far and away the most effective means of getting our message across. And also, we're still in the grip of a pandemic, and my view is, and you can disagree with me, if you want, but to disregard social distancing for that cause, no matter how strongly felt at a time of a pandemic, that may cost people's lives as well. And I personally don't feel that's right, but I don't want to get drawn into a debate on that. So, the right to peaceful protest is fundamental to us as UK citizens. We should use that right, but I firmly believe that peaceful protest is the most effective in the long run. And if I think about, the great leader, the Mahatma Gandhi, he died for peaceful protest, and his words that, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, I think, rings true with me on times like this. Thank you for the question. Sorry, Chris, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, and I think that that's addressed the vast majority of what people have asked. If we haven't been able to address specific issues or concerns, I've either done that privately or we will do so as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Chris, for fielding those questions. Hopefully, if you've had specific questions, you've had those responded as we've gone along. Drop emails to me, heads of year, any members of SLT, if you've got things that come to your mind afterwards. Very happy to help. Thank you, Ray, for making it all work. It doesn't make it any easier for me to do this. I still just can't get used to it. Thank you all for attending. When I get updates, I will certainly give them to you, and I'll probably use this method as well as writing letters. We really hope to see as many of you back as possible. If you've got children in primary school, I hope they're getting on well and I hope they're enjoying it, and I hope they're coming back with smiley faces. For those of you who are moving into the school in year 7, or parents in primary schools that are coming to us in year 7, we'll use this medium to meet parents, talk them through how the transition is going to be managed. We've got videos being produced to help pupils that are coming to school see their way around as best as possible, because it's not going to be feasible. It'll be against the guidance for year 6 pupils to come to us before July. So that's how we're going to be managing the transition. So thanks very much for listening. Sorry if I've made your dinner late. Hope to see you all soon. The video will be posted on the website, and you take care of yourself. God bless, keep up the good work, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Bye bye.